This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. And what I'm looking at today is 2022's The Night House, directed by David Bruckner. And Bruckner was also the director of Hulu's reboot of Hellraiser, which he only got, according to David Goyer, because of The Night House. Having seen The Night House, that decision mystifies me. That David Goyer, whose company Phantom 4 Productions actually produced The Night House, as well as had a role with Hellraiser, thought for a moment, based on that movie, that Bruckner was a good choice to direct Hellraiser, is mystifying for me. Because, having seen The Night House, he is not. Now keep in mind, by my reckoning, David Bruckner is a director like Mike Flanagan, which is to say, he uses horror to talk about other conditions that ail us. For instance, I interpret The Night House to be primarily about depression and loss, with an overlay of a ghost story. This is something that Mike Flanagan, I think, does quite often. And I don't mind it. My only issue is that David Bruckner can't seem to do anything else. Which is to say, The Ritual, a movie I enjoyed and I think is actually his best movie, is about guilt and overlaying with a story about this entity. Hellraiser is about addiction, overlaid with a story about Cenobites and the Lament configuration and so on and so forth. He can't seem to tell a horror story that is just a horror story without it being about something else at heart. I don't mind that necessarily, but at the same time, there are places where it shouldn't be. For instance, Friday the 13th is not a great movie in a lot of ways. In other ways, it's fucking magnificent. The fact that it's not necessarily about anything beyond what's on the surface is okay. As long as one can do more than that, it's fine. David Bruckner doesn't seem to be able to make a movie that's about whatever without an underlying issue being at the heart of it. And that gets kind of tiring. For instance, The Night House, as far as I can tell, seems to be about guilt and loss. And those are the themes that are way too close to the surface. So much so that the ghost story gets pushed out. The Night House revolves around a woman played by Rebecca Hall, who is magnificent. And her husband kills himself. And one day she happens to be looking at his phone and she sees pictures of a woman who looks strangely like she does. And so she begins to investigate why that's the case. Though prior to finding the phone with the pictures, she's being haunted by an entity. And she thinks that that entity is her husband. That's interesting. Though The Night House is so subtle, it's frankly kind of boring, truth be told. The music, by the same person who did the music for Hellraiser, is really good. And it and Rebecca Hall do the heavy lifting in the movie. Unfortunately, the story benefits neither. It's too subtle. Okay, let's put it this way. It takes an hour and a half of this movie to actually understand what is happening, what's behind the hauntings, why the hauntings are happening, which is actually very interesting. But up to that time, it's so subtle. Now keep in mind something. When I say subtle, I mean from the perspective of someone watching a movie. If what was happening to Rebecca Hall were happening to me, it would be fucking terrifying. But unfortunately, the movie doesn't do a good job of portraying that. There's a distance. So therefore, it comes off boring. And that you have to wait so long to find out what is actually happening is irritating. Though, what's happening is fucking amazing. This movie, believe it or not, is a sequel to 1984's The Neverending Story. I kid you not. Not only that, the entity that's haunting Emma is literally, at points, called nothing.
What is the nothing?
It's the emptiness that's left. It is like a despair, destroying this world.
And in fact, the whole plot point revolves around the name Nothing when her husband leaves her a letter saying nothing will hurt her, thinking that he had outsmarted this entity. Spoiler alert, he hasn't. In any case, what her husband was doing was killing women that look like his wife, because there's a connection between her and the entity, and it wants to have her, and the only way it can have her is through death. So what he's done is kill women that look like his wife, and he's also built a house, well, the shell of a house really, that resembles his house for reasons of confusing and tricking the entity so that it never goes after his wife. And at some point, he kills himself thinking that the entity has been fooled. As I said, it has not, and it goes for his wife. This is an intriguing concept and is really interesting. But as I said, that you have to get through an hour and a half of the movie to learn it is frustrating. So let's correct that a little. It's not the wait before what's happening is revealed that's the issue. The issue is that everything prior to that is so subtle. And as I said before, if I were in that situation, it would be terrifying. But the point is, I am not. And it is a movie. And it has to dramatize. It has to make these things appear really terrifying. And it doesn't. This is a frustrating movie because you can see what David Bruckner is trying to do. And as I mentioned earlier, Rebecca Hall is magnificent. She carries the movie on her shoulders. It also stars Bondi Curtis Hall, who is a great actor, who is so, I would say, badly treated by the script, except that he doesn't appear often enough to be badly treated. He's just kind of there. He doesn't really do much, and it's such a waste of a good actor. But unfortunately, that puts even more weight on Rebecca Hall's shoulders. And she just can't bear it. She needed help from the script. She needed help from the director, and she just didn't get it. The Night House is interesting, but my God, it's not very energetic. It's too lazy in a way. It needed to pop. It needed instances of genuine shock, and they're not there. It's too subtle for its own good. That's not to say it's a bad movie, because it isn't. It's actually quite interesting in its own way, but it's just too subtle. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. If you agree, disagree, let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace. And have a happy and prosperous New Year.